Happy Saturday. Welcome to All the Things. This is a show where we discuss all the things related to God, the Bible, and real life. I'm Krista Bontrager, also known as Theology Mom. And the person on screen with me is not Monique Duson. Is the one and only Kevin Briggins. Welcome.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm glad I could fill in tonight.
Yeah, that's right. Kevin's filling in as a guest co-host for us tonight. Monique, who is normally here with me, is out of town at an undisclosed location, except if you follow her on social media. She made a public post today, but she told me not to tell anyone where she is. So I'll just let that be what it is. But we will tell you what she's up to in a few weeks when she gets back. And we are live, so make sure to interact with us. This is going to be a very interactive and interesting show, and probably one you're going to want to share with your friends, your family, and as Monique would say, your enemies. So, what's up with you, Kevin? What are you up to?
Oh, life.
Life, yeah. Those three
Summer's
kids, your
yep,
wife.
summer's ending, school starting back. I work for a university, so there are now thousands of more kids on campus. And
Okay.
so, yeah, just dealing with all the things that come with that.
About ready to retire from the military.
I am. Yep, that's winding down. That is bittersweet, I will
Mm.
say. Yeah. So, but I'm
Well,
looking forward to it.
thank you for your service. And it's probably a good time for us to both mention that the Center for Biblical Unity is a 501c3, and anything we're saying here tonight, we don't endorse any particular candidates or parties. Uh, Kevin and I might slip in a few opinions here and there of our own selves. We're representing ourselves at that point. Kevin's not an official delegate of the U.S. military or his university. He's speaking on his own, but we do want to try to help people tonight think through political platforms from a Christian worldview.
Absolutely.
Hopefully nobody melts down, because man, there's politics makes people very emotional and upset.
It does. I mean, outside of religious conversations and convictions, I don't know anything that's more emotional driven than politics.
Mm. Yeah, so it's tough. We've done some content recently, trying to help people navigate these choppy waters, and so we will look forward to your comments tonight on the stream. And I think the first place I want to start, Kevin, is the idea that politics is downstream of our theology as Christians.
Yeah.
Like, we want to have a very clear differentiation that we're not voting for a Messiah. Um, we're we're not thinking that politics is going to save us. Politics for the Christian, for the informed biblical Christian, understands that the gospel and our biblical understanding is here. Our politics is downstream of that in terms of how we think the biblical worldview ought to inform laws and policies. What are your thoughts about that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think I I hate that we have to give that disclaimer, but we do because so many people, um, especially Christians, get that accusation.
Mm.
It's like if you really care about politics, then oh, you just made politics an idol. Or, or you if you are behind a particular candidate, oh, you think that person's a messiah. And it's like, no, that's not it. It's just that my biblical worldview dictates my political beliefs. And especially right now in our country, the two political parties, not even just the two candidates, the two parties are so polar opposite of one another and represents two totally different, completely different worldviews to where it forces you into a box of um, choosing one or the other, right? It's the middle ground that used to exist is almost no longer existing anymore.
We are very polarized, and I think that the wrestle for many of us is, how do we engage in the public square, and as our positions, biblically speaking, become more and more in the minority on some issues that we're going to look at as we go through the show, you know, it becomes difficult to say like, well, I want to advocate for certain positions that I think might not cause God to destroy my country because we're going to be under judgment at some point if we keep
Yes.
advocating such godless satanic policies.
Yes.
And so for the Christian, you know, as Allie Beth Stuckey says, politics matter because policies matter because people matter. And policies do have a direct impact on people's lives. And there is a component of justice that we have to think about and the impact of the most vulnerable. And how do we wrestle through these issues from a biblical standpoint? Now you and I have a very specific definition of what we mean by a biblical worldview, because I was on the not the progressives for Harris, the evangelicals for Harris call last week, and they would say that they are also making a biblical case for voting on that side of the aisle. And so there is that we have to acknowledge that there will be Christians who are naming the name of Christ who are going to be coming at these issues and weighing them in a different way than probably you and I will tonight.
Yeah, I think that's important. And I also think it's important to understand where those views come from, right? And also where they err in conflating maybe some things we see in scripture with modern day government, right? So let's say, for instance, Christians call to take care of the poor. That doesn't automatically conflate to I must support this government policy. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, and so some of those things I know we can get. I know we're going to get into later.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's important to realize kind of where their beliefs come from in terms of understanding the social gospel and liberation theology and all of those things.
Yeah.
And how they get to that point where they believe that they're supporting a biblical worldview platform when in reality they're completely not.
Yeah, it's definitely, I'm glad you brought up the issue of liberation theology because it's definitely more informed by that version of Christianity. Another point that I think it's important for us to make as our operating assumption up front is that we are not here to support any particular candidate. There's going to be places where we're going to disagree and differ with the conservative candidate or the Republican candidate and the Democrat candidate. We probably have more disagreements with the Democrat candidate, but we want to state very clearly, like, nobody here is suggesting that politics is going to save you or that being a conservative is the same thing as being a Christian. So if you come on here and start talking crazy that that's our belief, that's not our belief. Let me just state that up front. Christianity can exist just fine without conservative politics. But conservative politics cannot, I would contend, cannot exist without Christianity. It is the Christian faith, the Judeo-Christian faith, and some of its principles of the historical, not the current, but the historical understanding of the common good that is based on Genesis 1 and 2, that truly involves real human flourishing, a topic that Monique and I did an entire show about earlier this season, defining the term human flourishing. That would be a good companion to this discussion. What do we mean by that? That's what Christians are trying to conserve. We are not trying to conserve merely a party. We are trying to conserve certain ideals and principles that we see as intrinsically connected to our faith as Christians and human dignity. So let's just be clear that conservatism and Christianity are not the same thing.
Absolutely. I think we found that out earlier. I mean, I know plenty of conservatives or people I agree with politically, but they are not Christians, you know? There are people I know who are atheists, and I would probably consider them more classical liberal, but on a lot of political things we agree with, right? And so, yeah, being conservative or having certain political positions does not equal Christianity.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
So when people say, well, Christians just shouldn't even be involved in the public square, Jesus isn't riding the elephant or the donkey, and it's kind of this, he's called us to be in the world, not of the world, and his kingdom is not of the world. This all kind of, to me, always sounds like a little bit of a cover story of trying to make politics into this morally neutral thing. I don't think that that's the case. We, as Christians, have a responsibility to pronounce things good and evil, to use our prophetic voice, if you will, in the spirit of the Old Testament prophets to say, that's good, that's evil. Well, where are we getting this standard? Well, that's the Bible itself. It's not just some secular idea floating out there in the ether. The standard that we are using is an objective standard or measuring rod, which is the Bible. So if we're going to participate in politics, we're going to have to say some things and point some things out, not just by party affiliation, but by principle, and specifically biblical principles. So we're not going by majority opinion. We're not going by our experience or our feelings, some human measuring rod. This was a big issue for Monique and I when we first started talking. She very much had a view of politics of like majority opinion. Well, this is what the majority has voted for. In your conversations as a leader in churches, is this kind of mindset? Do you ever see this?
Not so much. The churches I've been in, especially in my adult life, has been mostly understanding a conservative mindset and a biblical worldview that scripture is the final authority for what we believe in all things in life, right? And so I really haven't had that argument and fight in the churches that I've been in mostly my adult life. It's been an understanding that what we believe is driven from scripture.
They must all be on my page then, because they always
Absolutely.
show up for the conversation. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, then along those lines, well, how would you respond to somebody who says, well, Kevin, we can't, as Christians, legislate morality? How would you respond to that?
I would say the only people who are told to believe that are Christians and conservatives, right? I believe there are a lot of things that we've been told to stop us from being involved in politics or kind of pushing biblical ideas and values and principles within laws and politics, because the other side has never treated it that way. We would say you can't legislate morality, but that's exactly what they do in the pushing of their laws. Someone's morality is always enforced. There is no neutral ground, right? And so if it isn't Christians being influential in pushing a biblical worldview and biblical values within our laws and our culture, then who is, right? And so that's the question we have to ask. And so, yeah, there is no neutral ground that we've been made to believe. We believe, we've been told, like since the 1960s in the secularist movement, right, that, religion is kind of in your home and in your church, but when you come to the public square, we kind of come to this neutral, secular, kind of gateway, and it's just not true. And not only is it not true, like I said, the other side has never been as neutral. They've always treated it as a battleground, and that's partly the reason we are where we are today, because Christians kind of laid down. We stopped being very vocal in our beliefs, and we stopped being very vocal in the public square, and other people started being way more vocal. And we got told that, oh no, you're being religious. Oh, separation of church and state is another one, right?
Yeah, related sentiment of like, yeah, your religion is fine, just keep it private, keep it at home, keep it in your churches or wherever your worship centers are, but don't bring it in the public square. And it's like, now wait a minute. Almost every law goes to a moral issue. So to say you can't legislate morality, to me, and Monique and I went round and round about this in the beginning, because that's what she used to always tell me. And I was like, no, well, now wait a minute. Making laws against fraud or theft, where do we get those ideas that that's something we
If
should have laws against? Well, that's the Bible.
Yeah, and since we can't legislate morality, let's just get rid of laws that's against murder. Since we
Yeah,
can't legislate morality, we know murder is wrong, but we can't legislate morality, so why even have a law on it? Let's just take the law off the books, right?
yeah,
No one believes that you can't legislate morality. They always believe we do.
exactly. The question is what's the standard? What
Yep.
is the standard you're going to use to come up with the moral compass for the public space, whether that's the city council or the state government or the national government? So that kind of raises a question for me too that I don't think there's enough conversation about this issue, and that is, what has God designed the government to do? This was a big question that Monique and I talked about in the beginning, because as she was a very progressive in her views, and when I asked her that question, well, what do you think God has designed the government to do? I'm not asking your opinion about what you think the government should do. I'm asking, what is your biblical data for what you think the government should do? She had honestly never thought about it before. And that was interesting. And so I think, like, from your perspective, like big picture wise, like what do you see as God's plan for government? What is it that they are to really be up to?
Yeah. The government ultimately is to bring justice against those who do wrong,
Mm.
right? We think of what, Romans 13.
Yeah.
And so that is kind of the ultimate, the government, God giving government the sword of justice against things that are evil, right? The government has a responsibility to defend its people.
Mm.
Um, and so that's why you have armies and militaries and borders, and the government can determine to go to war to protect its people. And so that's kind of, when you look at scripture, that's kind of, and to assure, like you're talking about justice, right? That to ensure, bring the sword against things that are evil, that can be murder, or that can be ensuring that people aren't defrauded, right?
Right.
And so it's ensuring that justice and fair is done throughout society, and people are treated on a fair and equal basis.
And I think it's a great summary of what I always say is protect the innocent and punish the guilty. But we
Yep.
have to have a standard of how to do that, of what our laws are going to be. Romans 13 verses 1-4 is a great passage. That you've made reference to. I want to encourage people to just look it up and take the time to look it up. But securing the nation, prosecuting criminals, and I think it's important to even think about. I just had this thought this week that God seems to be favorable toward the idea of nations. We see throughout Scripture the existence of nations, where God has he challenges, and I think is when it comes to empires. When we see of God bringing down these large scale kind of empires and bringing judgment against them. When we see in Revelation 7 and 9, we even see a revisiting of the word nations, that all the nations will be around his throne, languages, tribes, but we don't see empires. In
I
fact,
think I know why.
yeah, in fact, toward the end of Revelation, an empire is used as a personification of evil and corruption. And so, it's something to think about from a biblical perspective of being cautious, I think, because of the human condition and the sinfulness of the human heart, that
Yep.
empires can be very treacherous. And, I think that there's just a lot in there for us to contemplate and think about. I also want to have Bob put up on the screen 1 Samuel chapter 8, I think, is the passage where Israel asks for a king. And ironically, our family is going through the book of 1 Samuel right now. We're not quite to chapter 8 yet, but this is such an interesting passage, is that God says, this is when Israel is asking for a king. he's warning through Samuel like what's going to happen, and he says this is what the king who will reign over you will claim as his rights. He will take your sons, make them serve with his chariots and horses. In other words, go out to war, and they will run in front of his chariots. Some he will assign to be commanders of thousands and commanders of fifties, and others to plow his ground and reap his harvest, and do a lot of work for him. Others will be forced to make weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers, and he will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive groves and give them to his attendants. So there's kind of a picture here of, conscripting land, private property that had been owned by the Jews will now be conscripted into the service of the king, of the government. And notice this, he will take the best of their servants and their livestock for his own use. Verse 17, he will take 1/10 of your flocks, and you yourselves will become his slaves. When the day comes, you will cry out for relief from the King of heaven you have chosen, but the Lord will not answer you in that day. And here we get a little picture, I think, a little snapshot of God's warning of when you put so much power in one individual that it can become easily degenerative into oppression. And earlier in that chapter, Bob, could you just put that up there real quick and scroll back to verse 2, I think it is. He says that when Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons as Israel's leaders. And his sons did not follow in his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain and accepted bribes and perverted justice. And so leaders do not always do the right thing according to God's standards. And this is why power is so important, that we pray for righteous and godly leaders. But there can be a lot of difficulties that come when your leaders are corrupt and maybe even overtax you, which I find very interesting that a 10% tax was seen by God as being oppressive. We're a little above the 10%.
A little bit, yeah.
I don't know. Any thoughts about any of that?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned about how power being in one person's hands can be detrimental. And this was God's judgment on Israel for denying his rule. They wanted to be like the other nations and have a king, and this was the judgment that would come on them because of that. It's amazing you say that, because in a way, our form of government and democracy is a attempt to overcome those judgments, right? It is an attempt to overcome what it means to be under the thumb of power, right? It's trying to limit that power so that people are as free as possible, and that those consequences aren't in place. And so when you think about our founding fathers and the principles that they took from in setting up and establishing this form of government, a lot of it had to do with their experiences under true oppressive, bad rulers and leaders, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think that passage is really telling as to what we must be careful of when we think about government power and the people we put in power.
Yeah.
No, we try to limit the effects of that as much as we can with our form of government, checks and balances, 3 branches, all of those types of things. But a evil ruler, like I say, taking bribes and being corrupt, can totally lead to the people being treated very unjustly under the rule and power of government.
Yeah. I think that it's so important to think about what I love about our government, if it works correctly and people don't corrupt it, is the shared powers of the 3 branches of government. Because to me, that recognizes that humanity is sinful and no one person should have ultimate authority and control. I think part of the genius of our country is the distribution of power. And so if one person is corrupt, there's other factors that can help balance that out. Now, when everything becomes corrupt, that can be very problematic. But I think that our founding fathers of our country, because they were informed, at least in part, by a biblical worldview and principles of the Bible, they understood that humanity was sinful, and it took some steps to try to, kind of diminish that impact on various forms of the government. I think another important operational assumption that we have as Christians is that we see how God commands individuals to be responsible for helping the poor, and that this is a sign of our love for God. It's an extension of our righteousness. We have seen Christians historically engaging in large scale, sharing and starting orphanages and helping the poor, humanitarian work, establishing hospitals. But all of this was an outgrowth of our belief in the intrinsic human dignity. But it was the job of the individual or a collection of individuals who wanted to pool their resources to do these things. I think that one of the big problems, and we're going to get into this right after the break, is that people have substituted the responsibility of the individuals to have it be an extension of our love for God and our righteousness and our orientation toward holiness, to having government come in and do all of these tasks. Have you noticed that? Do you think I'm onto something there?
No, absolutely. I've noticed that. That's one of my big, I guess, pet peeves, and I'm gonna try not to go on a rant, but I look at Jesus tells the parable of the Good Samaritan, right? And it is the Good Samaritan who takes out of his own pocket and helps, the person in need who he has come across within his own path, right? The Bible even talks about a man who doesn't work, who doesn't support his family is worse than an unbeliever.
Mm-hmm.
It's these personal things within your circle and influence that you're responsible to take care of, right? Voting, I'm like, there's nothing righteous about voting for the government to take money from someone else to go do that work. And it doesn't affect you at all. You don't have to give your time, your effort, your care, anything, none of your resources. It is tax the rich. They do it, the government does it, and then the government also just sends the money to that person. There's nothing righteous about it. There's nothing biblical about that, And so when a lot of these, evangelical for Harris people try to make these conflations that, oh, this is a biblical thing, it's like, no, it's not. You go help your neighbor. You go help the poor person on the street. You go and you say take care of the elderly. You have a responsibility to take care of your own parents, first of all.
Yep.
Right? It's these personal things that we have a responsibility to do that we've shoved off to the government so that we aren't hindered by it or bothered by it. Right? And then we want to act like we're some type of righteous group because I voted for this. And it's just like, no, you unburdened yourself of the responsibility of it. That's all you've done.
That's good. All right. We're going to hear from our friends at Impact 360. When we come back in 90 seconds, we're going to start to unpack the Democratic platform.
It's time to prepare. Let's get ready for the journey ahead. Life doesn't give us a redo. We don't get to run it back. Along the way, we will face obstacles and challenges, but we are carrying light into the dark places. Our paths and our destinations are different, but our beginning is the same. We must prepare. This is why Impact 360 Institute exists. Get ready to grow, to stand firm, to be who God created you to be, to lead with courage, truth, and love. This experience will transform your life. Be challenged to grow your faith. Learn how to think, not what to think. Build community with those seeking to live like Jesus. Establish spiritual rhythms, discover how to be and make disciples. And put your faith into action. As you prepare for the journey ahead, deepen your understanding of what God has revealed about reality and why Christianity is true. Discover your identity in Christ and your God-given calling in authentic community. Cultivate a servant's heart and live a life of spirit-empowered kingdom influence.
Once again, go check out the work of our friends at Impact 360. I know that all the students moved in yesterday, and they have 109 students on campus this year. And so it's going to be a big year ahead. And go check out what they're doing. They have summer camps. They have the gap year program to see if it might be helpful support for your family and your discipleship efforts. Okay, Kevin, let's get into the DNC platform. It was just finally released this week. It mentions President Biden throughout the whole thing, so we will see that. It doesn't mention Harris. I don't know what happened if the interns didn't quite have time to go through the document and change the names, but so we will see the words President Biden throughout the whole thing. And I think that I'm going to have Bob's got it here. He's going to put it up on the screen, and we're going to just look at a few snippets. We're going to start at the bottom of page 8 here, which I think has an important kind of foundational assumption. And Bob, if you could just highlight that very first sentence in that paragraph there. President Biden believes that you shouldn't have to go to a 4-year college to live a good middle-class life. There we go. And I think that that's a really good summary of, you can just come back to me. It's okay. I think it's a really good summary statement of a lot of the operating principle behind the DNC platform is that their goal is to have the government help you live a good middle-class life from womb to tomb. That is, in my opinion, a key thread throughout the whole platform is here's a bunch of social policies where we're going to help you live a good middle class life. That was my impression. I don't know. What are some of your opening thoughts?
Yeah. And it's the thing is, that initial sentence, I don't even disagree with.
Yeah.
Because I believe that there should be jobs available that don't require a college degree. But in terms of the overall principle, what you're saying, absolutely. That they do believe that is kind of the government's job. And I don't even know if we're going to touch on it, but I read the poverty section and I came away, my belief is that they simply want to get rid of the consequences of poverty, not really get rid of poverty. Right.
Yes, that's good.
Yeah. And so it's we want to take care of the poor. We want to look out for the poor. But you can't just have a section of the population that you just continue to make dependent upon your benevolence, right? And so it should be the goal should be to get people to working and self-sustaining when they can support themselves and live not necessarily a middle class life, but where they can support themselves in terms of food and clothing and the necessities of life, right? I think, especially in America and our culture, we have such a high standard of quality of life to where even people who we consider poor have a great quality of life, but we look down upon it because it's like, well, they can't take vacations and they can't buy this or they can't do that. And so it's almost we don't the standard with what the Bible is talking about in terms of the poor, we've stretched that out to what that really means is kind of what I'm getting at,
Yeah.
And so because it is all about a middle class lifestyle, and so anybody who can't meet that middle class lifestyle, we kind of deem them as quote unquote the poor, but yeah, that kind of is and a lot of there's a lot of theory behind it, whether it's the Democrats or the Republicans. There's this theory that the reason you ensure that people can meet a certain lifestyle, middle class lifestyle, is so that they don't uprise against the upper class, I guess you can say.
Mhm.
And so it's like the rich people don't mind paying some taxes or getting hit on some things as long as it keeps everybody else happy. And so I think the Democrats operate a lot on those types of principles. And it's funny because the Democrats try to come off as if they're not the party of corporations, and they absolutely are, right? They just make it sound as if they're really for the people, but it's really just to keep the people quiet in their place so that the people don't uprise against the elites of society.
Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't really ever heard that before, about kind of keeping the lower class sort of a bit satiated so there isn't an uprising. That's an interesting theory. I think what bothers me, though, about this operating assumption that I really saw throughout the Democratic platform is that it makes a lot of things then into rights and entitlements
Yes.
that I question whether or not there's a biblical warrant for that. So, like, for example, at the bottom of page 17 of the DNC platform talks about healthcare. And it says healthcare should be a right in America, not a privilege. Well, okay, maybe depending on what we mean by that. But then every American deserves the peace of mind that quality, affordable coverage brings. And that's why Democrats fought so hard to pass the Affordable Care Act, which they couldn't have passed without some Republicans, but all right. Providing 45 million Americans with insurance, guaranteeing protections for 100 million people with pre-existing conditions, and protecting nearly 180 million people from lifetime coverage limits. So they're kind of combining our compassion. And I think that Americans, part of our culture is that we are a very compassionate, tolerant people. That they're combining that with a national entitlement program of health insurance, which is a business. And the question that for me that never gets asked is, what has been the impact of Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act? What has been the impact on that? Because I don't know about you, but my insurance has never been higher. And
yes,
it has become infinitely more complicated having the government that's involved. When I think about my grandparents who really had very little insurance other than catastrophic insurance, they made personal agreements with what we now call their primary care provider, and paid that person directly. It was just a completely different world, and the prices were much more reasonable, and we weren't charging people $50 for Tylenol. So I'm not totally sure that this is an area where the government ought to be controlling it quite on this level. I mean, I can kind of maybe see a case for a security net for the indigent and the very, very poor. And we could talk about that. But where we're at now, I have questions.
Yeah. Let's go back to the thing about healthcare being a right.
Yeah.
Nothing that requires the service of someone else can be a right to you.
Mm.
That is like principle number one. So someone providing healthcare for you can never be a right because it requires the effort, skills, and talent of someone else, right? But they use words like rights as a way to basically, it's like if you can make something a right, then you can justify its existence, or you make it hard to argue against it because you said it's a right, kind of like hiding abortion under reproductive rights, like just the word rights. And then if anyone wants to say, hey, abortion is murder, we shouldn't do that, the argument is, oh, you're taking my rights away, right? And so it's just a very powerful word they throw in there to get it, because it causes people to have a certain emotional reaction or attachment to whatever it is they're promoting. But in terms of like the healthcare strategy, um,
But see,
I
I'm not
have,
sure that we've even explored other strategies. Like, see, and this is where like people are on the comments like, so are you against, healthcare? No, it's that my thought is we have one system and one way of doing it that was supposed to improve things. I don't know if people remember. I'm old. I remember the election of 2008. I watched the presidential debates, and this was supposed to improve an already broken system. My question is, I think it's broken it even more. I don't see improvement. My question is, shouldn't we be trying a lot of different solutions? And is the federal government, should they really be in the insurance business? I'm a skeptic of this position. I think that there's other alternatives
yeah,
available that could work. And again, I could maybe see a case for the very indigent or the disabled to the point that like they can't work. Like we could have that conversation and what that looks like. But I, I am very concerned about the idea of health insurance being a human right. Like that doesn't make sense to me.
yeah, it's because we have an industry that is funded on insurance and makes a lot of money off of insurance. So this is what we know. Anytime there's insurance involved, and anytime there's government subsidies involved, it drives prices up,
Yes.
right? Because it's a collectivist payment instead of the market being driven by what the person can afford to pay, it's driven by the collective payment of the insurance company, right? Um, for instance, if you didn't have insurance, they couldn't charge you $50 for Tylenol in the emergency room because no one could afford to pay that. And so they could only charge you what people could afford to pay. But the insurance company will pay it, right? Because it is based on a collective people of there's all these people who pay for insurance who don't use it. So the people who do use it, they can afford to pay, these crazy high bills, whatever for an MRI cost, right?
Yeah.
And so the real solution, which no one would do because there's too much money involved, is get rid of insurance, right? Make healthcare based on consumer availability to pay. And insurance is used for catastrophic things like you got cancer, you were in a car accident
Right.
and you need surgery and a long hospital stay. It's almost like think about it as like your car insurance. Think if you had insurance for your oil change and you had insurance, every time you need to change your tires out, right? It would drive the cost of those things up because it's an insurance payment and not what you as the buyer or the consumer can afford or willing to pay.
Yeah.
Um, and so the fact that we need insurance just to go to the doctor, like I'm not feeling well, I need to go to the doctor, I need insurance. That's a problem. That it shouldn't be that way. That's not catastrophic emergency, types of things that something like insurance would be for. Thinking like your home insurance. I have home insurance in case my house catches on fire or storm or something like that. I don't have insurance to change out my air filters or the my uh sink is clogged up.
Yeah. Your
I don't
housing
have it.
insurance doesn't cover that.
Yeah,
It,
it's for catastrophic things,
right.
but for healthcare, you need insurance for anything that is just basic healthcare services. And that's where we've gone so wrong in it. And so now it's like, oh yeah, now everybody deserves healthcare. So now we got to have this national insurance program. And instead of saying just get rid of insurance, but it's an entire industry with so much money involved, no one's ever going to get rid of it. So that's
Yeah,
really
and
what's driving
but
it.
now the government's in the insurance business, and people don't understand that this actually hurts the working poor the most. And
Yes.
and so it's not the indigent poor that are at the very bottom rung, but the working poor, people like my hairdresser, okay, who work very hard, but they have often, they're living paycheck to paycheck. And insurance, by the government being in the insurance business, it drives up the costs even more. Go check out the show that we did a couple of years ago with our economist friend, Dr. Degner at Cornerstone University. We did a whole show about how inflation works and how when the government gets involved in things and there's more money, it actually drives up the prices and it hurts the poor the most. So, while the
Yeah.
DNC is putting this in their platform, what the normal regular person might not understand is that sounds really good. I want the government to pay for all my insurance and pay for all my health care and everything. But if we were to think about other alternatives, it could actually drive down the prices and the working poor could participate and have more autonomy and choice. So,
Yeah, I'll say this when it comes to, so my mom, she was working poor. She was the working poor. And when the Affordable Care Act kicked in, her insurance went up tremendously. And I was like, I thought she was the one that this was supposed to be helping.
yeah.
Why is my mom insurance just went skyrocketing through the roof, right? And she's a check to check working class person, working poor. And so yeah, I saw the effects in my own, world and family of this thing kicked in, and all of a sudden the prices shot up. And
Yeah.
so, and I know many other cases that happen as well. And so, yeah, the government getting involved typically never drives prices down. Look at college tuition. Does government back student loans because everybody deserves an education? Has that brought the cost of education down? No, it made it skyrocket. And so, like I say, anything you put insurance to or anything the government subsidizes in that way, it drives the cost up because no matter what the price raises to, it's paid, right? Because it's not based on the consumer's ability to afford it.
But again, this is the operating assumption of the DNC platform is that the government will take care of everything. They'll even help you with tuition payments and they'll help you with health insurance. At the top of page 21 in the DNC platform is preschool for all. Now they want to get to our kids even sooner. That they want to have universal preschool for everybody. And I'm like, okay, I don't know if I want the government to be that involved. I mean, but this is the thing. When you are among the working poor, these things all sound good and helpful. I'm here from the government. I'm here to help. But there's a trade-off for that once you get into that system, my husband and I have a saying of the golden rule of money is that he who has the gold makes the rules. And if the government has the gold, they make the rules. And so they can force you to have certain experimental medical things that you will be forced to participate in. That you must send your children to these kinds of schools in order to get the money. And there's things that are attached to the money. And this is true in welfare and all of these programs. He who has the gold makes the rules. And I'm concerned about the impact on human souls. This is what I used to tell Monique, is when you start taking in all of those entitlement programs and participating with them, what is the impact of that on the human soul, to their dignity, to not have to have your autonomy, the impact to work and provision for your family? These are deeply Christian ideas, but I feel like I'm alone in that perspective of kind of being a skeptic about the true good of these entitlements.
Yeah. People don't typically view it that way, but you're right. A lot of times it's what sounds good, it's what feels good. And we're not really examining things of, okay, what are the unintended consequences? For example, the war on poverty, right? The war on poverty, the mid 1960s, what did it end up doing? No matter how good its intentions may have been, what it did was subsidize single motherhood, right? And in the Black community and the white community, single motherhood has tripled since, well, I should say this, in the 2 decades following the war on poverty, single motherhood tripled. The black community went from 25% to around 75%, and the white community went from 8% to up to around 25%, right? So it tripled both groups because the government decided to get involved and give money out in this war on poverty, and they subsidized single motherhood in the process. Might have been good intentions, but we need to think about, hey, is this something that is supporting? It really comes down to, do you understand human nature, right? Do you have a biblical worldview to understand human nature? And a lot of times these government officials do not. They simply understand what can make them sound good to the people, what can get them elected or reelected, and then they promise those things, right? Without thinking about the unintended consequences. I don't like to think of ill motives all the time. I think a lot of things within the DNC platform, they truly believe in their bones are like good things that we should be doing, that the government should be doing, and it's going to help. Um, but when you don't have an understanding of human nature, when you don't have an understanding of kind of biblical principles, kind of what you were talking about in terms of what does this do to the human spirit and soul, and when you take away someone's agency,
That's the
when you
word I've
take
been looking for. Yes. Their
yeah,
agency. Yeah.
yeah, when you take away a person's agency, right? When you take away a person's even responsibility to care and provide for themselves, let alone their own families, what does that do to people? You know? Um,
Well, and if I look at the biblical pattern of helping the poor, again, to bring us back to a point that we made earlier, that is something that in scripture, if we're looking at it from a biblical perspective, is primarily the job of individuals, not the government. The government's job is military protection, protection of the nation, and establishing just courts and laws, and having people that don't take bribes and engage in fraud, and protecting people from those sorts of things. So Tiana on the stream, she's asking, paying taxes should provide certain things, right? I am confused by what you're saying here. And I think, Tiana, that just takes us right back to the question that we asked in the beginning is, well, it depends. I want to pay taxes to have a good military because that's a biblical thing. I want to pay taxes that it goes toward things like law enforcement to keep us safe, protection over our law courts, and making sure that we can have quality defense. I think a defense attorney is an important thing. And so I want my taxes to go toward things that we all share, like roads and being able to have infrastructure that all people can use in order to sustain themselves. I'm a skeptic that it's the government's job to be in the insurance business or to take care of every need of the poor and to try to elevate them into middle class, a middle class perspective, position. I think that God leaves that to the agency of the person as to, how they are going to love their neighbor through work and that sort of a thing. So when people's agency gets robbed, I have questions about that from a biblical perspective. I don't know, Kevin, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, the government needs taxes to take care of the functions of government. Government needs to run, right? And so for your public officials and the things that they're responsible for, whether it's border protection, national defense, they need taxes to do those things. The problem we have today is the more and more the government decides to take on as its own responsibility, and the more it grows, the more taxes it there and therefore needs, because now it has to take care of everyone's health care. Now it needs to fund all the public schools.
Yeah.
Now it needs to, take care of all of these other things that were never intended for it to do. But now that it's taking it on, it's saying, yes, we need more money.
Yeah.
And then that just comes to the whole other side of does the government even still need more money? Is the government run very efficiently?
That's a
I don't
big
think
question.
I
Yeah.
don't think anyone would believe that. The test I always use is the Dave Ramsey test. Dave Ramsey would say, if there was a nonprofit, right, and they showed you their numbers and it was run as poorly as the federal government, would you donate to it? And most people, they wouldn't. When you look at a nonprofit, you look at, okay, how much of it, let's say it's to feed the children, right? We would say, okay, how much of what they take in goes towards feeding children, right?
Versus
If it's like
administrators
versus
and
administration, right? Yeah. If it's
people.
like, yeah, if it's like 15% of what I get is actually going to feed the kids, I'm not giving to that organization. They're just
Right.
taking my money. When we look at the federal government, that's how it is. And so if we were to judge and evaluate it that way, we would never donate to it. But yet we vote to raise taxes or to tax for the government to do whatever program like healthcare, right?
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's just we evaluate the government differently for some reason, even though it's horribly inefficient, it's wasteful spending, and it's corrupt. It
Yeah.
is, you know. I'll give an example. This is a true example. I've worked in government for over 20 years. In the government, at the end of the year, what we call the end of the fiscal year, which is September 30th, any money in your budget you have not spent, you spend it.
Right.
Because if you don't spend it, next year you will get a lesser amount of money.
Right.
Because clearly you don't need that much money. Right.
It's an incentive to spend the money.
It is an incentive to spend the money.
Yep.
So every year, government agencies go on spending sprees to buy things they do not need, to take trips they do not need to take, because they have to spend their budget so that instead of saving their money or being efficient with it, it is like you need to spend every penny and you find stupid stuff to buy. And that's how government works. And know what they do the next year? We raise the budget. And we do it all over again every year, and people on the inside of the government understand this. And we're like, this is ridiculous, but it is how it works and operates.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's just things like that. You need to say, is it really a wise or good thing to have the government in charge of this thing? Right. And so those are the kind of questions that we need to evaluate. And sometimes the answer could be yes. I'm not going to say the answer is always no.
Right.
But it's things that we don't consider, and we need to stop just going off of language that sounds good, like rights and
or thinking that if I just have the government take care of all my needs, then oh, that sounds great. They'll pay for my college and do this and do that. Another one is the federal minimum wage. They want to raise that to $15 an hour. Well, we've got that in the great state of California. And that's at the bottom of page 9 if people want to look that up, or discusses the federal minimum wage. It says Congress will increase it to at least $15 for all Americans. They've already upped the minimum wage for federal contractors to $17.20 an hour. And I think that sounds nice. That sounds like it's helping the working poor. But we did a whole show about the impact of minimum wage laws and how that actually hurts the working poor the most. And yes. I'll tell you, I mean, it even hurts Monique and I at the ministry. We are mandated by the state of California to take a particular salary. We can't take less, even if we don't need that much, so we have to rely on donations, a certain amount of donations to come in, because the state of California says that if you work full time, you have a threshold that you must meet. And that's a disincentive for us to hire help, where we could redeploy some of that money toward hiring other people and creating other jobs. It is a mess. And having these high minimum wage laws that we have in California we're paying like $15 out here for a meal at Chick-fil-A. I'm paying $15 for this. And it in part because of minimum wage laws going up so dramatically. In California, the fast food minimum wage is $20 an hour. And so a lot of fast food places are asking the question, can we stay in business? We might have to eliminate all the jobs now because we have to shut down because we can't sell $20 Happy Meals. That's not going to work.
Yeah. So I'll say this. I'm not the smartest person in the world. I'm a C student, but some of the stuff I can figure out. And some of it just doesn't make sense. Because the first thing I would say is, Krista, why don't you just hire someone illegal and pay them under the table? You don't have to pay them that much. Because that's what they're incentivizing.
And then I, as a Christian, get in a moral dilemma. Monique and I have had these conversations of it costs us, if we're hiring somebody for $20 an hour, we're actually paying $30 an hour when we add in all the taxes in California.
Yes.
It's a huge problem.
Yeah. And so think about it. Yeah. So just think about it from a common sense perspective. I raised the minimum wage, so I make it more expensive for you to hire someone who's an American citizen. And at the same time, I allow millions of illegal immigrants into the country. So I bring in a lot of illegal, cheap labor to compete with American labor. If it makes it more expensive for me to hire Americans, and I'm also flooding the market with cheap, illegal labor, I'm not looking out for the American worker, right? Who's benefiting from this? It's the corporations who are benefiting from the cheap labor.
It's not small businesses like ours.
No, and this is the thing too. If I make it, because that's just bringing illegal immigration in is just one element, right? Yeah. So American workers have to compete on a global scale. They have to compete with workers in other countries as well now. And so thinking like manufacturing, if you make it way more expensive to hire American workers and labor costs are high, you are only incentivizing companies to take their stuff and move it to Mexico or China or somewhere else, right? And so those are the kind of policies. It's like you don't really care about American lower class workers, because if you did, you wouldn't have these policies that disincentivize people to hire actual Americans to do work, right? Yeah. And like I say, I'm not the smartest person in the world.
Yeah, I'm not a professional economist, but I do hire people. And this is a big problem.
It just seems like basic common sense. Yeah. If it's competing labor costs, I'm making one really expensive and I'm bringing in cheaper labor for it to compete with. It just makes, you don't really care about the person you claim you're raising a minimum wage for. You don't, because you're just making it harder for them to get employed.
And this is my problem when people like Evangelicals for Harris talk about loving your neighbor. I always tell people, look, love must look like something. It can't just be a word or an empty platitude.
Yeah.
And these sorts of policies, I have concerns that, and at CFBU, that we are a justice-oriented ministry. This is why we have had shows about inflation and corrupt monetary policy and minimum wage laws, because we think that these actually hurt the working poor the most, and that these are not just. And so if we're going to talk about loving our neighbor, we have to talk in specifics. And I have concerns that these policies are truly helpful for the working poor. All right, one more, and then we have to run to the Republican platform. We're running out of time. Is fixing the housing problem. This is one more thing, and this is an area where you have some experience in the real world in dealing with housing and trying to engage in urban renewal projects and putting your own money at stake in doing this. And so you know a thing or three about this. But on page 24, let's see. Some 15 years, I'm going to start at the top. Some 15 years after the subprime mortgage crisis devastated homeowners, we're talking about the 2008 crash, and froze construction nationwide, we're still seeing the effect of a severe housing shortage that's pushing up prices and keeping homes out of reach. President Biden has taken historic steps to help Americans rent, buy, and build. They want to incentivize like a certain amount to homeowners. And so you can go through here and read about all of their proposed benefits, entitlements that
Yeah.
they want to give
Yeah.
people. But I'm just curious, in your thought, in reading through this section of the platform, do you think that what they are proposing will, in fact, fix the housing crisis?
No, because they did rightly say what the problem is, right? It is a shortage of housing. It's a supply and demand issue. So what they're offering doesn't solve the problem. And this is why it doesn't. Building homes is a local government issue. Like, I don't go to the federal government if I want to build a home somewhere. I go to the local ordinance, right? I go to the city council. I get permits to build, and those get approved or denied. The reason places I'm gonna pick on where you are, Krista, like California, LA. The biggest reason places like that have housing shortages because of what we call the not in my backyard syndrome. Everybody believes we need more housing. Everyone believes that they need to do something for in this problem. It's just don't build it in my backyard, right? Don't build it in my community because we don't want more traffic, or we don't want multifamily housing because we don't like it's going to change the look of our community. And so when those things get proposed by builders to be built in these areas, the locals show up at the meeting, they oppose it, and the local city council, because they want to get reelected, they go with the people and they deny the permit to build whatever it is because the people don't want it. And so the federal government can't fix that. You can give all kind of incentives you want. If people don't want that stuff built in their communities, then it's just not going to get it built. You got to change things at the local level if things want to get built. And so that's as someone who's been in real estate, you talk to builders and developers, it's the local municipality that controls it all. It has nothing to do with the federal government. So even if the federal government gave people assistance to buy homes, $30,000 or
Yeah,
whatever it
I mean,
is.
there, even in California, there's some, I cannot believe this is true, but I'm seeing news reports that they want to give $30,000 to people who are here without proper identification, $30,000
Yes.
to buy a home in California,
Yes.
where the existing citizens are having difficulty securing housing.
Yeah. And so this is the thing. They haven't learned from the 2008 crash.
Exactly.
The subprime mortgage crisis was a crisis created by the federal government. And this is what they did. They took people, they said, once again, home ownership is a right. Everyone should be able to afford a home. And so they came up with these loan systems with the bank that gave people loans to buy homes who normally would not qualify to buy a home. You no longer needed 20% down. These subprime mortgages, loan vehicles allowed people to buy homes without being properly qualified in terms of debt to income ratio and all that kind of stuff, right? Credit score. And so what you did was you increased the demand for housing. Now all of a sudden you have all of these people that can buy houses. And so what happens when demand goes up and supply doesn't? Prices go up. And so the prices skyrocketed. Well, it was an artificial bubble. The economy changed. People started foreclosing on homes they could never afford in the first place, and the whole thing crashed on itself. And then builders since then have just been shy to just really build anything because of what happened in 2008. Well, the government getting involved and offering more incentives to put more people in the housing market who can't really afford to buy houses is exactly what we did that led to 2008 housing crash. They just don't learn. They just do the same thing over because it feels good to say, oh, these people should be able to buy a home. Can they qualify? Are they good? Are they in a financial position to buy a home and afford a home and make the payments and take care of the home and all those types of things, right? And so just incentivizing artificially inflating people to make them homeowners does not solve the problem, right? And so, yeah, it's just not even a federal government issue. I don't care which political party it is. The federal government can't change the housing situation. I would love it if they lowered interest rates. That would make more people eligible to buy a home because the housing market has really slowed down since the rates have gotten up to 7%, which is what it was intended to do to combat inflation. But if you really want more people in the housing market, the way you're going to do it is to lower the interest rates. But that's not going to lower prices, though.
No, it won't.
It won't lower prices, but it makes more people able to afford a home because the interest rates are lower. But that's about it.
But the scheme back in 2008 and prior to that led to the crash in 2008 was really a scheme to help historically marginalized communities get into home ownership. Yes. And so they lowered the standards, they came with these adjustable rates and all of these different lending schemes to, quote unquote, help the poor get into home ownership, because home ownership ought to be an achievable dream for everyone. Well, for some people, it's just not. And I think that people don't have an appreciation, I think, of how this idea of, hey, we're going to help all of these people get into home ownership that maybe aren't quite able to manage all of that financially.
Because let's be honest, we're not talking about homelessness.
Right.
These were not homeless people. It's the idea that everyone deserves to own a home.
Right.
That's where it went wrong.
Yeah. Okay, with that, we're going to hear from our friends at the Unshaken Conference. Monique and I are looking forward to seeing you in Buffalo, New York next month. And so here's a little bit about the Unshaken Conference. Also coming very soon this fall to Austin, Texas. We'll be right back, and then we're going to see the Republican platform.
Unshaken 2024 is coming. Join 3 of the most influential voices in cultural apologetics, Natasha Crane, Frank Turek, and Elisa Childers, as they equip Christians to live for Jesus in a world increasingly at odds with biblical Christianity. At Unshaken, you will join hundreds of others who are seeking to navigate the intersection of societal pressure and biblical truth, covering topics such as deconstruction, social justice, sexuality, and many more. Unshaken will teach you what the Bible has already said about the social issues we face today, and equip you to stand firm in God's truth. The Unshaken Conference will be visiting Buffalo, New York, and Austin, Texas in fall 2024. For details and tickets, visit unshakenconference.com and use code FRIEND20 to get 20% off your ticket price. Join us this year for an experience that will embolden and encourage your faith. That's code FRIEND20 at unshakenconference.com. See you there.
Okay, with that, we want to quickly move into the Republican platform. It's much shorter.
I noticed that.
Yes. So we've got that. I just wanted to highlight just a few things here. The lion's share of what we were doing was on the DNC platform. But what I noticed about this, one of the things I noticed, Kevin, is chapter 4 of the Republican platform. I mean, look at their commitments. Republicans offer a plan to make the American dream affordable again. We commit to reducing housing, education, and healthcare costs while lowering everyday expenses and increasing opportunities. So the Republicans want to, again, we're seeing the theme, housing affordability, help people buy new homes, reduce mortgage rates, accessible higher education, and affordable health care. Drug costs are out of control, and lower everyday costs. Now, they're identifying a lot of the same issues that the DNC is identifying, but they have, at least in theory, different ways of solving these problems. But I have to admit, I have some skepticism about this, because I still feel like a lot of this will expand to the government, not shrink the government.
Yep.
I hope I'm wrong about that, but there's parts of this that I kind of feel like kind of just sounds like, in some ways, a lot of the same concerns as the DNC. I don't know. Maybe I'm being too much of a negative Nancy about it.
I'll say this. So the first one, because we just talked about affordable housing.
Yeah.
The first one up there, they talked about housing.
Can you put it back up?
My kind of first thought criticism of this when I saw it was, okay, they can reduce the mortgage rates. I just talked about that.
Yeah.
But slashing inflation. So this is the thing that people need to understand about inflation. So you can slash inflation, the rate of inflation. Inflation happens naturally, right? You want about 2 to 3% a year inflation. When things were really bad, we were at 9, 10% inflation. That's when prices went up. When inflation goes down, the rate of inflation goes down. The value still goes up, though. We are never going back to old prices, right? It's like saying if we cut inflation, we can get back to 1960s home prices. We will never go back. The home prices of 2019 will never come back. They just won't, because the dollar is worth less now because of inflation.
And the
Right?
corrupt monetary
And so even
policies
cutting
of our
down the
government.
rate
Yeah.
of inflation, yes, yes. So even cutting down the rate of inflation is not the same as cutting prices.
Yes.
You're just stopping the rate in which prices go up, right? And so I think that's key to remember, right? That is the house that's in your home that's 300K now that used to be 200K. It is not going back down to 200K, right? It's still going to be 300K. It's just not going to go to 350 next year, kind of deal. It's slowing that rate down, which
So
is a
it's
good
not
thing.
like
It is.
it's not like if Trump were to win, he's going to sign an executive order on the first day and say all housing prices are slashed.
Exactly.
Like that's not
No,
how it
it's
works.
not. The houses aren't going on sale.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
50% off. It's not Oprah and you get a house and
And you get a house. Yeah.
No. No. And so, but the one thing they did put in there that interests me, because I talked about the housing stuff being controlled by local municipalities because you have to get permits to build something, and we need more housing. They talked about opening up federal land. I went and pulled up the map of federal land. I I'm not sure if trying to build on federal land is even going to solve that problem, right? Because when I see federal land, I see, state parks. I don't think the federal government owns a lot of land in LA, right? And so like in the areas where people want to live, where there's, infrastructure, that's typically not what federal land is. Federal land is like middle of nowhere, Nevada.
It's the
Kind of deal.
desert here.
It's the desert.
It's like nobody
So I
wants
don't
to
know.
live there.
Yeah, I don't know how much federal land and
Yeah.
building houses on is going to really fix the problem, right?
Yeah.
That's their way of trying to get around the fact that it is local municipalities that really control what can be built and what can't. And so, once again, it sounds nice on paper, but I don't think the federal government can really affect that.
Interesting. Okay. All right. Let's skip to chapter 10 that talks about military and security, an actual biblical idea. And keep keep America safe, keep America strong is kind of the theme here. And the Republican plan is to return peace through strength, which was a Reagan slogan, rebuilding our military and alliances, countering China, defeating terrorism, building an Iron Dome missile defense shield like the one in Israel, promoting American values, whatever that means, securing our homeland and borders, reviving our defense industrial base, build a bigger military, better and stronger than ever before. Our commitment is to protecting America and ensuring the safe and prosperous future for all. All right, you read through this part of the platform. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, means typical Republican conservative military. I mean, it was to the point. It was I agree with the peace through strength. I know that kind of came from Reagan, but I think it's proven to be the best foreign policy in terms of bringing peace to the world. One thing that Americans and those in the West, one thing we fail to understand the rest of the world, right? We think everyone is exactly like us, think like us. And so we a lot of times think that if we're simply nice, they will like us. That will bring some type of peace because they like us. When the rest of the world, not fear, well, I guess you could say fear, but it's really strength and power is what they respect, right? that's why a lot of countries in other parts of the world thrive under strong leadership, right? Sometimes it's a dictatorship or authoritarian because that's what it takes to keep peace, and that's what they respect. If you come in there and you're weak, you're more than likely gonna get overthrown. There's going to be a revolt against you, right? And so we're so civilized in the West, and we just think, everything is just be nice to people. The Biden administration said, you know what, if we just nice to Iran and release the $6 billion, they'll cooperate with us. That didn't happen, right? What happened? They ended up funding more terrorism. They ended up funding the October 7th attack in Israel. They're still funding things, and it's because a lot of it because we released their money to them instead of continuing the hard-nosed financial sanctions on them that we had put on them. Yeah, and so it's one of those things of, peace through strength is something that needs to be done because that is what the rest of the world respects. We do need to continue to build our military in terms of size, number, technology. Those things are important. And it's one of those things because even within the conservative circles now, there's this strong isolationist, don't get into any conflicts type of mindset, which I'm not against. Hey, you don't want unnecessary wars for the sake of wars to feed some kind of military industrial complex. Absolutely not. But we also wrongly assume that if the United States pulls back and we just say, if we don't care about the rest of the world, we're just going to pull everything back home and be isolationist, that the world will once again, that the world is just going to remain neutral. And it won't. There will be some other power that steps in and fills that vacuum. And we already know what that power is. It's China, because they're already trying to do it. When we pull out of a region, they come in. They're setting up bases. They're getting agreements.
They're all over Africa, South America.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so it's one of those things of, if you're saying that America needs to pull back, do we really want communist China, to be influencing and controlling the rest of the world and these countries and influencing things around the world?
Filling that vacuum. I don't know if that's a great plan.
It's not. And that's why, we need to, continue to have a strong military. We need to continue to have, because I believe America, by and large, is a source of good in the world in terms of what the alternative could be. I'll just say that.
Maybe we should do a show after you're out of the military sometime. I would love to talk about DEI issues and
I'm glad you said that.
More pronouns or less pronouns, more guns. I don't know.
I wish they would have mentioned that. I mean, I know former President Trump has mentioned in his speeches before.
Yeah.
I wish they would have put it in there because it needs to go out of the military.
Yeah. Iron Dome. Is that realistic in America?
So I'll say this. So America's always had a national defense to protect ourselves from rockets and all that kind of stuff. It's one of those things. It's kind of like national health care. It sounds good when it's in a small Scandinavian country. It's a lot different when you're trying to do it in a country of 350 million people. Same thing with a huge Iron Dome. It's one thing for a little nation like Israel to be able to do it. It's for us, the size that we are, it'd be very difficult and expensive to have some type of system like that. And I don't even think it's really necessary. We don't have enemies at our gates the way Israel does, right?
Yeah.
If something is going to be shot at us, it's going to come from a long way away. It's going to come from Russia, China, North Korea. This idea that, we have things in place to already counter and handle those types of threats. So it sounds good, but I don't think it's necessary at this point.
Okay. As we kind of wrap up here, I want to talk about two things I noticed that were missing from the Republican platform. One was a biblical definition of marriage and sexuality. There is just not there. And full protection for the unborn. In chapter 9, subpoint 4, it says that after 51 years, because of us, the power has been given to the states and to a vote of the people about the issue of life. We will oppose late-term abortion while supporting mothers and policies that advance prenatal care, access to birth control, and IVF. And so now we're kind of shifting the goalposts here a little bit. We're only going to protect some of the unborn. We're not going to protect the unborn in IVF clinics. We're now going to incentivize it, and we're not going to protect the early gestation unborn. It's just sad to me that we're now basically pre-2008 Democrats in terms of our views on these issues. And I mourn that and think it's a huge mistake. And I really hope that people will continue, who are in high places, will continue to advocate for a return on those issues.
Yeah. Few thoughts I have. Number one, for so long, the fight was to overturn Roe v. Wade.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That was the whole fight. And then it happened. And then it was like, okay, what do we do now? We achieved it. So now that because I don't think people understood that overturning Roe v. Wade wasn't banning abortion. I think it's the way people always viewed it, right?
Mm.
Overturning Roe v. Wade simply took it away from a federal across the board thing and made it, hey, each state can determine for itself. So now we're at a point where, from a Christian standpoint, either we have to say we want the federal government to pass a federal law abortion ban across the country, or we have to change directions and say, okay, now our focus is to get it banned at each state level, right? Those are just different strategies. I know for a fact the reason the Republican Party took it out and said, okay, now it's a state level is because, sadly enough, our country does not share our strong Christian convictions on the eradication of abortion or the abolishment of abortion as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And the fear that a Republican administration would do that drives people to the ballot box to vote for the other party. And so what they're making a calculated decision to say, is at the state level, we're not going to touch it at the federal level. I'm not going to say I disagree with that. It's easy for me to say I live in the South. I live in a red state. We have put in tough abortion laws and restrictions. For you in California, there's no shot of it ever happening. At least not right now.
No, we'll import people to give them abortion.
And sadly enough, that's what's been happening is people have simply been leaving states where they can't and going to states where they can. I don't know the answer to that. I know there's plenty of people that say yes. I'm torn. I'll be honest. I'm torn because part of me wants to say abortion is wrong. Yes, at the federal level, ban it. Then the other part of me says, well, that's not really how our government was set up to be. The federal government isn't in charge of that. And so I'm conflicted in that. But at the same time, I know if the other side got in office and had the opportunity, they would make abortion the law of the land, you know? And so it's one of those things of, do you say, you know what? If they were in office, they would make the abortion the law of the land. If the other side gets in office, they need to, make abortion ban across the board.
Well, I see that so different.
Really?
Yeah, I think that equal protection laws, I'm totally for them, and the equal protection laws would extend to the unborn. So I'm not necessarily banning abortion, but that's a backdoor effect of it, though. But to preserve the life of all preborn equal protection for the woman and the child. I think that that's absolutely in the purview of the federal government, just as you're protecting, you have murder laws. I just want to see them extended consistently so that it includes the discarding of the unborn, even from infertility clinics. I am for 100% equal protection laws for all preborn life.
I get you. No. And you know what? I agree with you. That's a much simpler way of putting it without. Yeah, I agree with you. Would you be in favor, because you talk about laws against murder, would you be in favor of anyone who commits an abortion or anyone who has an abortion being charged with murder?
100% on those who commit abortion. I think they should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law for some version of murder. For the mothers, I'm increasingly more sympathetic to prosecuting mothers, except in the case where it's coercion. I think there should be protection for mothers when it's coercion. So like in a human trafficking situation, or sex slavery, and because I have a friend who endured 3 abortions because she was in a sex trafficking situation. And so she was coerced into that. I'm not for prosecuting those women, but I do believe in equal protection for all of the unborn. And I don't quite understand the position that we're going to have a special category of people that we don't prosecute for murder.
No, so if we're going to be consistent in it, I believe we're going to be biblical. I agree with you. Yeah.
It's a very unpopular position.
It's just one of those, it's just one of those things of, like I said, it was like Roe v. Wade was always the goal, and no one ever really thought about what came after that. We thought we overturned Roe, we win. And then we realized we really hadn't. It just changed, it just changed the fight kind of deal. So no, your position is a much more consistent and simpler position. Absolutely.
It's an unpopular position.
Like most biblical positions are.
Yeah. And I'm not saying it can happen tomorrow. I think we're a long way in our heart posture as a country from that. But I'm just saying, as a principled biblical position, at some point, people who are against slavery, even though the country was 100 years away from getting rid of slavery, some group of people had to stand up and say, this is wrong.
Yeah.
And I'm going to pray that the Lord changes the heart of our country. Hopefully it doesn't involve a war, but slavery is wrong. And I say the same about equal protection laws for all the unborn. I'm against, this is one of the reasons why I take a principled position against almost all versions of IVF treatment, is I think that it results in too many casualties of baby murder.
And I'll be honest, even on that, until recently, I didn't even know that was a controversial. Because it was just always such a positive light. Like, they went through IVF and now they have 2 kids. It's like, oh, that's so great. You just really didn't know what it entailed. It's only recently that it's like, oh, that's a controversial thing, and they're doing some things that are kind of very questionable to bring about that process. And so,
All right. Well, as we wrap up here, and we should say that this is a point of departure increasingly for me, myself, with the Republican platform, is I do not want to financially incentivize IVF. I don't want to do that. I want equal protection laws, and I think we're a long ways from that. All right, Kevin, as we wrap up here, we had a question earlier on Facebook saying, do you think a Christian can vote Democrat? I think that's just kind of a broader question of, do you think it matters how a Christian votes? And would love to hear your thoughts about Christian conscience and, thoughts as a member of an elder team. Like, how have you guys thought about this? What are some of your thoughts?
This is my unpopular opinion, because we talk about politics is downstream of culture. Well, culture is downstream of worldview.
Yeah.
Right. And when we look at the worldview that is ultimately driving the Democrat Party and their policies, if we think about all the things that CSBU typically brings up and warns people about, critical race theory, DEI, queer theory, gender theory, what's some of the other stuff? The school, the learning thing.
Oh, social emotional learning,
Yeah, SEL.
comprehensive
Yeah,
sexuality
all of
education.
those things that we're bringing up as, hey, these are very dangerous things. These
Yeah.
are ideologies that are very anti-biblical, and they're all being driven by one political party, and it's the Democrat Party, right? And so if someone is going to vote for that agenda, you know, the trans ideology, the way it's being pushed in schools and the children, drag queen story hour. If a Christian's gonna vote for that, I need a hard understanding as to what makes you think from a worldview perspective that that is something that is good and needs to be pushed, or something is so important that you can overlook all of that to simply vote for them, right? Um, because I'll compare it to there's the I'll just say former President Trump is very controversial, right? And he's viewed as not a very moral man, right? And let's just say this is how I view it differently. In his personal life, he might engage in some activities that I would view as sinful and not appropriate. However, I would view it differently if he was pushing a policy that should be taught in our schools, right? And I think that's the difference. It's not about these what people do individually. It is about the worldview and the policies in which they push for us to live by. And when we evaluate the two platforms and the two worldviews and the two sets of policies, I don't understand how a Christian can vote for the Democratic platform. I don't care what person is there, right? So it's not even about the person, it's the platform and the ideology that they're pushing behind it. I have a hard time understanding how a Christian in good conscience could support and vote for those things that when we look at Sodom and Gomorrah being judged for, and we seems like we're 20 times worse than that, and say, I'd rather that be in power and I'd rather those people be in charge of my kid's school. And I just don't get it. So that's my controversial answer. I don't think a Christian can vote Democrat with a good conscience.
Or at least with, an informed biblical worldview as we've outlined
Exactly.
it in this show tonight. I think for me, there's a lot of people that feel like it's Sophie's choice. It's two bad options and I don't want either of them.
Yeah.
But I still think that there's value in saying, well, I have more agreement with one side of the conversation than I have with the other side. And I don't think it's a moral equivalent to say, well, more babies would likely die under the Harris administration than possibly under the Trump administration. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know how you quantify that, but it's because of the military strength and some of the things where I do believe that there is a biblical warrant for the legitimate place for government. My hope is that if Trump were to be elected again, there would be a follow through on certain military issues, border security, and a return to true blind justice, and strengthening our law courts for to be fair for all. And I do have concerns about the weights of justice, the thumb being on the scales of justice. So, those are some ways I think about it, biblically speaking.
Yeah. And I didn't even think about the way that they're doing justice and crime, and those things are also kind of an issue within cities and causing harm to communities. But yeah, I'll just say this, and this is an indictment on Christians who are voting that way. I know there are tons of atheists, mainstream atheists, that have said we need Christianity back. We need Christians to be influential. because we have realized our mistake. And our mistake of removing Christianity has brought up something that is antithetical to the way of life in which we've enjoyed. And those people who are not Christians are saying we need Christians back to oppose what's being promoted by the Democrat Party. And yet you have Christians who will then vote for the Democrat Party who can't see it, but atheists who aren't Christians can see the evilness that is being pushed through that. What is a woman? They can't tell you. Like the denial of basic truth and facts, and yet we have Christians who are willing to vote for that, who can't see the evilness of it, who can't see the lostness of it. And those who are atheists, do not believe in God, have said we need more Christians because Christianity opposes that. That is an indictment on Christians that vote Democrat.
And I think that for some people during the 2016 election, there was a one issue vote. There were some Christians who were like, and I'll say in all transparency, I didn't vote for Trump in 2016. I thought he was a clown. His everything he said was so vague in general. I'm like, there's no way he could possibly do this. I don't take him seriously.
Yeah,
that was my heart posture about him in 2016. I know a lot of people were like, I don't like him, but I'm going to be a one issue voter. He's promising a Supreme Court justice as pro-life. I'm going to vote for him for that. He came through on that. I think some people are voting for him today on other one issue things that matter to them. I think there was someone who came on our stream the other day. She said she's a one issue voter because she has daughters and she wants to vote for the president she feels like is going to protect women's sports and women's spaces and locker rooms and gyms. And
that's another thing. Yeah.
And that was her one issue. She said, this is where I'm going to put it down, So that's another way of kind of thinking about it is where do I think that he's really going to potentially, what candidate, do I think is going to best represent some issue related to my worldview? I don't know. It's a sad time in which we live and that these are our choices. It is difficult. Neither of them are great. I'm not in love with any of them, and I'm glad they're not running for Messiah. But I hope this conversation has been helpful to people. We would love to hear your feedback, that we were able to help you think through some things. I know it's been long, but I think it's been a good conversation. Thanks for doing this with me, Kevin.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime. I love doing this, and anytime you need me back, just let me know.
Yeah, just chopping it up.
Yeah.
So, all right, I want to give everyone a quick rundown on what's happening next week. We will be dark because Monique is on the super secret mission that's not public, but you can still go on her public post on Facebook and find out what it is. Then the following week will be another show. That was something that Monique and I were supposed to do together, but we weren't able to record it before she left on the super secret mission. So maybe I'll have Kevin back in 2 weeks if he can come back, and we'll do another thrilling adventure on a topic. And then she will be back, and we will have a live show when Monique returns. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please send us your feedback. Let us know, even if you're watching on the replay. Let us know if this was helpful to you and what other questions you have. And with that, I'm going to close out tonight with Monique and my book, Walking in Unity, coming soon, October 15th. And here, I want to encourage you to order 3 copies, one for yourself, one to give to your church library, and one for somebody on your pastoral team. Here's a little bit more about the book. Order now at walkinginunity.com.
My name is Monique Duson. I grew up in South Central Los Angeles. Life was tough, but more than that, life was Black. Lessons that the streets taught me were secondary to what my mother instilled in me. Being Black. I was a Black child, and one day I would grow up to be a strong Black woman.
My name is Krista Bontrager. I was raised by a Christian mother in the suburbs of Los Angeles. My mother instilled in me a love for Jesus and a strong work ethic. She taught me that if I worked very, very hard, someday I would grow up, go to college, get a good job, and have a family. In 2018, Monique came to live with my family. I asked Monique a lot of questions about race and justice. Things like, what is systemic racism? Should every church be multi-ethnic? And am I racist because I'm white?
I welcomed Krista's questions, but persuading her to what I knew was true about America wasn't easy.
We had many difficult conversations. And even though she didn't say it directly, I knew Monique thought my family and I were racists. I felt sad and confused.
I was not confused. I saw Krista and her family the way I saw most white people, privileged and participating in racist systems of whiteness. One thing quickly became clear. We saw the world very differently. And either we were both going to change, or we were not going to be friends.
Our worldviews were on a collision course.
Join us as we share our journey searching the scriptures and gaining a biblical perspective on issues like the multi-ethnic church, systemic racism, and how our nation became so divided.
And how we discovered a truth that is deeper than our cultural and ethnic differences, that Jesus makes cultural enemies into family.
Walking in Unity is coming October 15th from Harvest House.